Welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. We want to discuss Docker and Docker Compose, and specifically some pitfalls when you might be installing your Docker applications. So the Docker Compose command line was first introduced in 2014, less than a year after Docker itself was released. And the most common ways to run a Docker application are with either Docker Run or Docker Compose. So in June of 2021, Compose version 2 was released, and in July of 2023, Compose version 1 stopped receiving updates. And so hosted applications may experience issues as Docker versions change. And Compose version 2 deprecates the version directive and allows the docker compose.yaml file to simply be docker compose.yml. And so as of August of 2024, Docker is at version 26.1. And I had a tutorial back in May of 2022 that was entitled "You Transfer an Open Source Replacement for Dropbox," which is still a great application, but it's about 10 years old when Docker first came out, and it hasn't received any updates, and it actually requires Docker version 20.10 in order to run. So let's go take a look at some quick Docker Compose issues. Back in October of 2021, I did a video entitled Self-Hosted Password Manager, where I discussed the installation of Bitwarden. And so Bitwarden is one of those applications that's been around for quite some time, and it has several containers in it. In fact, if you do a Docker PS, you'll see that it has something like 11 containers. And it's a pretty complex application. For that reason, a lot of people decide to run Vaultwarden instead of Bitwarden, which is basically an open source fork of Bitwarden. But the open source Bitwarden application is really a great one, so I run the full version. So one of the pitfalls you can run into is that the way you update Bitwarden is, first of all, you move over to opt/Bitwarden, I believe. If we do a pwd here, we'll see that it is /opt/Bitwarden is the default location, and that's supposed to be the home directory of your Bitwarden user account, which is what I'm signed into right now. And this Bitwarden installation happens to be installed in an Incus container, but that's rather irrelevant. So the way you perform an update is to do a ./bitwarden.sh space update self, followed by the same command except update instead of update self. So here, if I execute this command, you can see a whole series of errors, and that's because I have Docker Compose installed. So I'm going to want to do a sudo apt remove -- purge on Docker -compose. And although Docker Compose worked for this application, and I see I'm not in the sudoers file, so I'll have to exit out and go back to my account where I am in the sudoers file, which is the Scott account. And I'm going to go ahead and do that same command again. And this time it should work. And there we go. And I'm removing Docker Compose. And now I'll SU back over to the Bitwarden account. And now we should be able to do the update self command, and sure enough, it runs correctly. And likewise, the update command would also run, but it's unnecessary since the application is already completely updated. But there I'm running it. It's stopping the application, removing the containers, and it's going to perform a standard update of Bitwarden at this point because I have removed the Docker Compose file. It turns out that it actually did perform an update, and I misspoke myself. I meant I removed the Docker Compose program and not the Docker Compose file. So it did pull the new containers for Bitwarden, and it's performing an upgrade. And Bitwarden is one of those applications that generally gets an upgrade approximately once per month. But as you saw, the installation of the Docker Compose actually overrode the Docker Space Compose that is built into Docker, the later versions of Docker, and that version of Compose is Docker Compose version 2. Here we are over in my self-hosted instance of uTransfer, which is another Incus container that I have. And I did this presentation back in 2022. I think it was May of 2022. And if we go in here and we do a Docker Space version, you can see that this is running Docker version 20.10, which is actually quite old. And if we look at the application itself, we notice that the last release of uTransfer over here on GitHub was October 18th, 2015. So it required Docker 20.10 to actually run correctly. And if we look over here, I Googled this, and version 20.10 was actually released in December of 2020. And so at the time I did that video, Docker 20.10 was still current, and so the application worked just fine. From time to time, I'll go back and update my show notes that are published on discussion.scotti-BYTE.com, and uTransfer, an open source replacement for Dropbox, which was the title of that tutorial in the YouTube video. I have here the notes for it, which were in May of 2022. And in the context of this, it says, note you need Docker 2004 for this old application. And I'm showing how I put the Incus container together and set it up. So I had updated it from LXD to Incus, which I used LXD at the time. And then down here I say specifically install old Docker version 20 on your bare metal host, your VM, LXD container, or actually Incus container. And then I direct you on how to install the old version of Docker. So ideally, you would want to be able to update the application, but since I'm more of a system admin person and less of a developer, I tend to try to find ways to get the applications that I use up and running. In this particular case, without doing extensive modifications to the uTransfer file portal source code, I'm able to get it to run by simply going back to version 20.10 of Docker. In the older version 20.10 of Docker, we had to have Docker Compose installed with the sudo apt install docker-compose, as I've shown in several of my older videos. But now, in present day, not only do you not want to install docker-compose because current or newer applications may conflict with it, you may want to uninstall it if you already have it installed. So that being said, if we look at this uTransfer application, which is using the older Docker 2010, and we go into its Docker Compose file, you'll notice it has the version :3 at the top, and many of your older Docker Compose files, in fact most of the ones you find online, will have that version line directive. And that's been deprecated, and so just be aware that if you're running a newer application with newer Docker Compose, it's possible to delete that version directive from your Docker Compose files. And one of the last things that I want you to be aware of is if we do an ls here, you notice that the actual name of the file is docker-compose.yml, and beginning in Docker Compose version 2.0, you can simply name this file compose.yml. So in summary, some applications may require older versions of Docker if they've not been upgraded, and the version directive has been removed from the compose.yml file, and for that matter, you can call it compose.yml as opposed to docker-compose.yml as of version 2.0 of Docker Compose. And there are instances where having this separate Docker Compose program installed can actually cause newer Docker applications to fail. So in general, keep your Docker or Docker desktop versions fully updated to the latest releases. Anyway, that's it for today. I hope you'll subscribe and like the video, and don't forget to hit your notification bell, and that way you'll hear about my new videos, and we'll see you next time.